The hospital doors slammed open behind me as I ran into the emergency department, and the first thing I saw was my daughter's face beneath the fluorescent lights. Emma Carter was 21 years old, but in that moment, she looked impossibly small beneath the white hospital blanket. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were open, fixed on nothing. A nurse was adjusting the monitor while another doctor spoke quietly to a technician near the doorway. I heard words I never wanted to hear connected to my daughter: multiple fractures, severe trauma, observation, surgery. Then the doctor looked at me and said there were 14 broken bones. I stopped moving. 14. My brain refused to process the number. My former wife's brothers had taken turns attacking Emma inside the house where she had once felt safe. Mark, Derek, Jason, and their version of the story had already begun spreading through the family before I even reached the hospital. They called it an argument, they called it an accident, they said Emma had provoked them, they said they had only been trying to control the situation, but Emma knew what happened, I knew what happened, and somewhere inside me, beneath the shock and the crushing pressure in my chest, an old instinct awakened. For 12 years I had served as a Navy SEAL. I had learned to remain calm when everything around me became chaos. I had learned that panic creates mistakes, anger creates mistakes, and rushing toward revenge creates the biggest mistakes of all. So I stood beside my daughter's bed and forced myself to breathe, in through the nose. Out slowly, observe, listen, remember. Emma finally turned her head toward me. Dad? Her voice was barely audible. I took her hand carefully. I'm here. Her eyes filled with tears. They said nobody would believe me. I felt something cold move through my chest. Who said that? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the door as though she expected someone to walk through it. Then she whispered, Uncle Mark. That was the first piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't the last, because when Detective Sarah Mitchell entered the room 20 minutes later, she wasn't carrying the normal paperwork I expected. She was carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside was Emma's phone. Mr. Carter, she said, we recovered this from the house. I looked at the screen. The display was cracked, but one notification remained visible. It was a message sent shortly before the attack. The sender was someone Emma knew. Someone connected to her mother's family. And beneath the sender's name were 6 words that changed the entire investigation. We need to talk before Dad finds out. I stared at those words while the room seemed to become colder. Who was Dad? Why were they afraid of me finding out? And what exactly had they been planning before my daughter ever walked through that door? Emma's surgery lasted almost 4 hours. I spent every minute sitting beneath a vending machine light in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Rachel, my former wife, arrived shortly after midnight. She walked toward me with red eyes and trembling hands, but I didn't stand. I didn't accuse her. I didn't shout. I simply watched her sit across from me. Daniel, she whispered. I didn't know. I believed that she hadn't known everything, but I also knew she hadn't told me everything. Where are your brothers? I asked. Rachel looked away. They're at home. All 3? She hesitated. Yes. Detective Mitchell stood several feet away, listening without interrupting. I noticed something then. Rachel's left hand was shaking, not from grief. From fear. Rachel, I said quietly, what are you afraid of? She looked at me for several seconds before finally answering. Mark has been angry for months. He said Emma knew things she shouldn't know. What things? Rachel swallowed. Money, property, some business records. My eyes narrowed. Suddenly the attack had another possible motive. Emma had inherited part of a family trust from her grandfather. She had also recently told me she believed someone was moving money through accounts connected to the family construction company. At the time, I had told her to take everything to a lawyer. Now I wondered if that warning had arrived too late. Detective Mitchell stepped closer. Mr. Carter, there is something else. She opened a folder. A neighbor reported hearing an argument before the attack. She said Mark told someone, if she gives those documents to Daniel, we're finished. My stomach tightened. Did she identify who he was speaking to? Mitchell shook her head. Not yet. The next morning, Emma woke briefly after surgery. She was exhausted and disoriented, but when she saw me, her eyes focused. Dad, she whispered, did you find my bag? Which bag? The blue one. I remembered it immediately. Emma carried a small blue backpack everywhere. It's missing, she said. There was something inside. What? She closed her eyes. A drive. My pulse changed. What was on it? She looked toward Detective Mitchell, then back at me. Everything. That single word turned the investigation upside down. We searched the house legally with investigators. The blue bag was gone. The family computer had been wiped. A security camera near the driveway had stopped recording exactly 17 minutes before the attack. And 3 people suddenly had different versions of what happened. Mark claimed he had never entered Emma's room. Derek claimed he had left before anything happened. Jason claimed he had been outside the entire time. Their statements contradicted one another so badly that Detective Mitchell eventually put her pen down and simply stared at them. Meanwhile, I stayed out of the interrogation. I wanted justice, not revenge. My SEAL training had taught me something far more valuable than fighting: control. I could not undo what happened to Emma by hurting anyone, but I could make sure every lie they told became another piece of evidence against them. The question was no longer whether they had attacked my daughter. The question was why they had been so desperate to silence her. 3 days after Emma's surgery, Detective Mitchell called me into a small conference room at the police station. She closed the door and placed a laptop on the table. "We found the backup," she said. I watched as she opened a recovered security file. The footage was grainy, but the timeline was clear. Mark entered the house at 8:14 p.m. Derek arrived 2 minutes later. Jason followed at 8:19. None of them left when they claimed they had. But there was another detail. At 8:06 p.m., a black SUV had stopped across the street. A man stepped out, walked toward the side entrance, and disappeared from view. "Who is he?" I asked. "We're still identifying him." She zoomed in. I recognized the jacket. It belonged to Victor Hale, the family accountant. Victor had been handling the trust Emma had questioned. "That can't be coincidence," I said. "It isn't." Mitchell clicked to another file. It showed bank transfers from the construction company into 3 private accounts. 2 belonged to Mark and Derek. The third belonged to someone whose name I didn't recognize. "The transfers started 6 months ago," Mitchell said. "Emma noticed them last month." Everything began connecting. Emma hadn't simply stumbled into a family argument. She had discovered financial fraud. She had copied records. She had planned to meet a lawyer. Then her uncles attacked her. The timing was too precise. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could feel the old military part of my brain organizing information automatically. Timeline, motive, opportunity, evidence, witnesses. But this wasn't a battlefield, and I wasn't going to treat it like one. I told Mitchell I wanted every step documented, and every piece of evidence preserved according to procedure. She nodded. "That's exactly what we're doing." That evening, Rachel called me. Her voice sounded different. "Daniel, Mark knows about the investigation." "Good." "He's furious." "Let him be furious. He said you won't stop until all of us are destroyed." I looked through the hospital window at Emma sleeping. "I'm not trying to destroy anyone, Rachel. I'm trying to protect our daughter." There was silence. Then Rachel whispered, "There is something I never told you." I waited. The night before the attack, Mark asked me where Emma kept her documents. My chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing." She began crying. But he already knew. That meant Mark had access to information he shouldn't have had. Someone had been feeding him details. Someone close to the family. The next morning, Mitchell discovered that Victor Hale had transferred money to an offshore account 2 hours after the attack. That transaction became the turning point. The prosecutor authorized subpoenas. Investigators seized the relevant financial records. The black SUV was traced to Victor. And then something unexpected happened. Victor disappeared. His phone went dead. His house was empty. His car was found abandoned at a train station. Mitchell called me that night. "Mr. Carter, we think he's running." I looked at Emma's hospital room door. "Then find him legally." "We will." "And detective?" "Yes, don't tell him anything about what Emma has told us." Mitchell paused. "Why?" "Because if he's running, we need to know what he's afraid we'll discover." She understood immediately. The case had just become bigger than 3 brothers attacking their niece. Someone had built a network around the truth. And that network was beginning to collapse. By the time Emma was transferred from intensive care to a private recovery room, the case had become local news. I hated that. Emma hated it even more. She didn't want cameras outside the hospital. She didn't want strangers discussing her life. She wanted her father to sit beside her and talk about ordinary things. So I did. We talked about the dog she wanted when she was 10. We talked about the terrible pancakes I used to make. we talked about college, we talked about everything except the night that changed her life. But one evening, Emma finally asked, "Are they going to prison?" I looked at her. "If the evidence proves what happened, the court will decide," she nodded. "And if they get away, they won't." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you used to when I was little." "How? Like nothing could scare you?" I looked down at my hands. I was scared all the time. She seemed surprised. "Really?" "Absolutely." I told her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing what to do while fear was present. That lesson had kept me alive overseas, and now it was keeping me from making a terrible mistake at home. Meanwhile, investigators located Victor Hale in another state. He agreed to return voluntarily after being told that cooperation could be considered by prosecutors. His interview lasted 6 hours. At the end, he admitted what everyone feared. Mark had discovered that Emma possessed financial records. He had pressured Victor to locate them. Derek and Jason had been told that Emma was hiding documents that could destroy the family business. They believed the attack would frighten her into revealing where the records were, but Victor revealed something even worse. The brothers had not acted alone. Rachel's father, Thomas Reed, had been involved in the financial scheme before his death. Several accounts had been opened years earlier. Emma had accidentally uncovered a system that had survived for more than a decade. That explained the panic. It explained the missing files. It explained the attack. But it didn't excuse it. Nothing could. The prosecutor built the case carefully. Medical records documented Emma's injuries. Security footage established the timeline. Phone records placed the brothers together. Financial documents established motive. Victor's testimony connected the pieces. And Emma's recovered message history showed that she had feared something was wrong before the attack. The evidence was overwhelming. Still, I knew courtrooms could be unpredictable. I had seen situations in my military career where the truth seemed obvious, but the final outcome depended on details. So I prepared for the hearing the same way I prepared for every difficult mission in my old life. Calmly, methodically, without assumptions. Then, 2 nights before the hearing, my phone rang. It was Detective Mitchell. "Daniel," she said, "we recovered the blue backpack." My heart stopped. "Where?" "Victor told us where he hid it." "Is the drive inside?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. "What's on it?" Mitchell was silent for a moment. "Everything." And this time, she didn't mean just financial records. The drive contained something that could prove who ordered the attack. If you're enjoying this tactical justice story so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more daily fictional military revenge and justice stories. The investigation moved forward, but now the most important evidence had finally surfaced. The blue backpack was placed into evidence before I ever saw it. Detective Mitchell insisted on maintaining the chain of custody, and I respected that. Inside the backpack was a small encrypted drive. Prosecutors obtained authorization to examine it. The first folder contained financial documents. The second contained photographs of transactions. The third contained messages. But the fourth folder was different. It contained audio recordings. Emma had apparently started recording conversations after becoming suspicious of the family business. She had never told me because she wanted to verify everything before making an accusation. One recording captured Mark talking to Victor. "She knows too much," Mark said. Victor answered. "Then make sure she doesn't go to Daniel," Mark replied. "Daniel won't stop." I listened from the other side of the conference room as the prosecutor played the recording. Nobody spoke afterward. The evidence didn't merely show motive, it showed planning. It showed intent. It showed that the attack was designed to intimidate Emma into surrendering the records. The next recording was even more revealing. Derek asked, "What if she doesn't cooperate?" Mark answered, "Then we'll make sure she understands what happens when she crosses family." I felt anger rise through me like heat, but I kept my hands flat on the table. This was the moment my old instincts mattered most. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to make them feel the fear my daughter had felt. But that wasn't justice. That was anger wearing a uniform. So I let the evidence speak. Prosecutors filed additional charges. The judge issued strict protective orders. The brothers were prohibited from contacting Emma or anyone involved in the case. Their attorneys began negotiating. Victor agreed to testify. Rachel provided financial documents she had hidden for years. And Emma, still recovering, agreed to give a recorded statement. She didn't have to sit in the same room as the men who hurt her. She didn't have to face them directly. Her statement was enough. She described what she remembered. She described the fear. She described hearing them argue about the documents. She described believing she might never leave the house. When the recording ended, the prosecutor quietly closed the laptop. "That will be enough," she said. But I knew Emma had given more than evidence. She had given the court her voice. Months earlier, she had been treated like someone who could be silenced. Now her testimony was the strongest part of the case. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Inside, Mark, Derek, and Jason sat with their attorneys. Rachel sat several rows behind me. Emma entered slowly with a cane. The courtroom became silent. She didn't look at her uncles. She looked at me. I nodded once. She nodded back. The judge entered. Everyone stood, and then the prosecutor placed the blue drive on the evidence table. The truth was finally in the room. The hearing lasted nearly 6 hours. Every minute felt heavier than the last. The prosecution presented the medical evidence first, then the security footage, then the phone records, then the financial transfers. Each piece alone might have been challenged. Together, they formed a timeline that was nearly impossible to escape. Mark's attorney argued that the attack had been an emotional family dispute. The prosecutor responded with the recordings. Derek's attorney claimed he had tried to stop the violence. The footage contradicted him. Jason's attorney claimed he had left early. His phone location contradicted him. Then Victor testified. He admitted his role in the financial scheme and described the conversations leading up to the attack. Mark stared at him with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't regret, it was disbelief. He genuinely believed nobody would ever betray him. He had spent years assuming family loyalty could protect him from consequences. Now the very people he trusted were telling the truth. When the prosecutor played the final recording, Rachel began crying. The recording captured Mark saying, "If Daniel gets involved, everything falls apart." The judge listened without expression. Then he looked toward the defendants. "The court has heard sufficient evidence to proceed," I exhaled slowly. It wasn't victory yet, but it was accountability beginning. After the hearing, I found Emma outside. She looked exhausted. "How are you?" I asked. "Tired." "You did well." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything. You told the truth." "That's not doing something?" I smiled. "It's one of the hardest things anyone can do." She leaned against me. "Dad, are you angry?" I considered lying. I didn't. Yes. At me? Never. At Mom? No. At them? I looked toward the courthouse. Yes. She nodded. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing outside the law," she smiled. Good. Those 2 words meant more to me than she could ever know. The final trial came months later. Emma had recovered enough to return to college part-time. She attended therapy. She rebuilt friendships. She learned to walk into rooms without checking every exit. She still had difficult days, but she was living again. During the trial, the defense attempted to argue that the brothers had not intended the consequences of their actions. The prosecution countered with the recordings, the injuries, the coordinated timeline, and the financial motive. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was guilty. Mark, Derek, Jason. All 3 convicted. Victor received a reduced sentence after cooperating, while the financial investigation continued against others connected to the scheme. When the judge announced the sentences, I didn't celebrate. I simply closed my eyes. For months, I had imagined what justice would feel like. I expected anger. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt something quieter. Relief. The kind of relief that arrives when you finally know your child can sleep, without wondering whether the people who hurt her will return. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me for a statement. I gave them only one sentence. My daughter deserved to be heard, and today the truth was heard. Then I walked away. The weeks after the trial were different. There were no detectives calling at midnight. No unknown cars parked outside the hospital. No attorneys sending threats through intermediaries. No emergency meetings. The silence felt strange. Emma came home for Thanksgiving and cooked dinner with me. She burned the first batch of rolls. I pretended they were excellent. She laughed for the first time in months. That laugh stayed with me. It reminded me that the story wasn't really about 3 men receiving sentences. It was about a young woman getting her life back. One evening, we sat on the porch while rain tapped against the roof. Emma asked me about my SEAL years. I had rarely talked about them. "Why did you never tell people?" she asked. Because being a SEAL isn't a superpower. But you could have scared them, maybe. Then why didn't you? I looked at her. Because the hardest discipline is knowing when not to use force. She thought about that for a long time. I think I understand now. I told her that military training had taught me to observe before acting, to verify before believing, and to protect the mission without becoming consumed by emotion. At home, the mission was different. It wasn't defeating an enemy, it was protecting my daughter and helping her recover. Emma eventually returned to college. She changed apartments, she joined a support group, she began studying criminal justice because, as she put it, she wanted to understand how systems could protect people better. Rachel and I never reconciled, but we learned how to communicate when it concerned Emma. Rachel testified against her brothers and helped investigators uncover additional financial records. She later told me she wished she had recognized the warning signs earlier. I didn't blame her. Blame would not repair anything. Accountability mattered more. The family business collapsed under the weight of the investigation. Several executives faced charges. The money was recovered slowly. Emma's inheritance was protected by court order. The people who had believed they could control her future discovered that evidence travels farther than intimidation. Months later, I received a letter from the prosecutor thanking me for my cooperation. I almost threw it away. Then I read the final paragraph. Your restraint helped preserve the integrity of the case. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. That sentence meant something to me. Restraint. Not weakness, not fear. Restraint. I had spent years learning how to survive dangerous situations, but protecting my daughter required a different kind of strength. It required sitting beside a hospital bed and waiting. It required letting investigators work. It required trusting evidence. It required watching people who had hurt my child stand in court without touching them, and perhaps most importantly, it required teaching Emma that the people who hurt her did not get to define the rest of her life. 1 year after the attack, she walked across a graduation stage. I sat in the front row. When her name was called, she looked directly at me. I stood. I applauded until my hands hurt. She smiled. That moment erased nothing, but it gave everything meaning. She had survived the worst chapter of her life and refused to let it become the ending. I still remember the hospital hallway. I still remember the fluorescent lights. I still remember the doctor saying 14 fractures. Some memories never disappear completely. They become scars inside the mind, reminders of what happened and warnings about what could have happened. But when I think about that night now, I don't remember only the fear. I remember Emma holding my hand. I remember Detective Mitchell preserving the evidence. I remember prosecutors building the case piece by piece. I remember the moment the truth finally became stronger than the lies. Most of all, I remember the day my daughter walked across that graduation stage. The same girl who had once been carried into a hospital eventually walked into a future nobody could take away from her. Mark, Derek, and Jason lost their freedom because of their choices. Not because I hunted them, not because I attacked them, not because I used my military background to intimidate anyone. They lost their freedom because evidence proved what they had done, and the legal system held them accountable. That distinction matters. Revenge would have given me one moment of satisfaction. Justice gave my daughter something much more valuable, a future. Years later, Emma became a victim advocate. She worked with students who were afraid to report abuse. Whenever someone asked why she chose that career, she gave the same answer. Because someone believed me. She meant me. But I always corrected her. The evidence believed you too. She would laugh. Dad, you always make everything about evidence. Maybe I did, but evidence had saved the case. Truth had saved her future. And patience had saved me from becoming someone I would not recognize. I eventually left the house where everything happened. I couldn't stand walking past that doorway forever. I bought a smaller place near the coast. On the wall above my desk, I kept a photograph of Emma in her graduation gown. Beside it was a photograph of us from when she was 6 years old, holding a fishing rod twice her size. Those two pictures told the whole story better than any speech. A child, a father, a terrible night. A long recovery, a future. Sometimes people think strength means being the most dangerous person in the room. I learned the opposite. Real strength is being capable of destruction and choosing restraint. Real courage is standing beside someone who is afraid and refusing to abandon them. Real justice is letting facts survive long enough to speak for themselves, and real victory is seeing the person you love return to the life someone tried to steal from them. Emma's scars will always be part of her story, but they are not her identity. Her attackers are not the center of her life anymore. They are a chapter she survived. She became a graduate, an advocate, a friend, and eventually a woman who no longer checked the locks 3 times before going to sleep. And that was the ending I wanted. Not revenge, not blood, not fear, freedom. Years later, Emma asked me one final question. We were sitting at a diner near the university where she had graduated. She stirred her coffee and said, "Dad, if you could go back to that hospital night, would you do anything differently?" I thought about it carefully. I remembered the anger, the helplessness, the temptation to use everything I had learned over 12 years in uniform. Then I remembered her face. "I would do exactly what I did," I said. "I would stay beside you. I would listen. I would call the people whose job it was to investigate, and I would make sure the truth survived." She smiled. "Even if they never got caught? Even then, why?" "Because your life was never supposed to depend on whether I could hurt someone. It was supposed to depend on whether we could protect you." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You protected me." I shook my head. "We protected each other." Outside, traffic moved through the city. People hurried along sidewalks. Students carried backpacks. Cars stopped at lights. Ordinary life continued. That was the miracle. After everything, ordinary life had returned. The brothers had become names in court records. The investigation had become history. The financial scheme had become a case study for investigators, but Emma had become something else entirely. She became proof that surviving something terrible does not mean living inside it forever. I never told her everything about the nights I spent awake, imagining different outcomes. I never told her how many times I drove past the courthouse just to remind myself that I had chosen the right path. I never told her how hard restraint had been. Children shouldn't carry their parents' fear. She needed to carry something else. Hope. So I gave her that. And if there is one thing I learned from the entire ordeal, it is this. When someone you love is harmed, anger arrives before reason. It burns hot. It demands action. It tells you that immediate retaliation will make the pain disappear. But anger doesn't know the future. Evidence does. Patience does. Justice does. My daughter didn't need a father who became another criminal. She needed a father who could remain standing when everything inside him wanted to fall apart. So I stayed standing. I stayed calm. I trusted the investigation. And eventually, the truth did what truth has a way of doing when people stop hiding it. It surfaced. The lies collapsed. The evidence remained. The people responsible were held accountable. And my daughter walked forward. That is the part I want you to remember. Not the number 14. Not the names of the men who caused the pain. Remember Emma walking across that stage. Remember her smile. Remember that her future belonged to her again. Because sometimes the strongest ending to a revenge story is not revenge at all. Sometimes it is watching the person you fought to protect reclaim every piece of the life someone tried to take away. That was my victory. Emma was alive. Emma was healing. Emma was free. And no one could take that from her again. Where are you watching from? Comment on your city or country below. What kind of story do you want next? Military revenge, psychological thriller, or emotional family justice? And here's the moral dilemma I want you to debate. If you were in my shoes, knowing your daughter had been brutally harmed and knowing you had the training and ability to confront the people responsible, would you have waited for the legal system, or would your anger have pushed you toward taking justice into your own hands? There is no easy answer when someone you love is hurt. But I learned that night that protecting someone isn't always about striking back. Sometimes protection means controlling your anger long enough to build a case that cannot be destroyed. Sometimes it means choosing patience when every instinct screams for immediate action. And sometimes the greatest victory is not watching your enemy suffer, it is watching your child smile again. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay safe, and remember that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is simply staying beside the person you love until the darkest night finally ends.
Thank you for watching Karma Knox. For all my viewer, my family, please you like video and share your friends, and comments me in comment section box what you like video. I provide you daily video effort, too much hour waste my time editing, create a story, next session for editing, and too many hour my effort provide you a story. Thanks for all viewer you like and subscribe my channel. You must be share your friend videos. Thanks for supporting. Goodbye. See you next video.